This real side experience would open up where I would be as an individual within a vast city, and although the city would present as though its entirety were captivated within the confines of my real side view, my impressions were that that which I saw of it was but a fraction of its overall size, as though the personal self was being provided the simulation that it could handle, that it isn't overwhelmed with imagery, but at the same time the overall dimensions of it were made apparent via the overview of my real awareness. For indeed, there is in actuality one isness everything reality, a reality that our real awareness is a part of, that permeates through all consciousness, as a consciousness then effects into simulated form of environment and body type throughout all simulated creations, from the ideas that consciousness comprises of. As such, from the real awareness overview position, is everything available and within the nowness of its reality. But the personal self mechanics rather deals with the pieces and parts, as after all it is from the individualized and isolated idea parts that a comparison with the everything isness be made possible, that until we recognize this true reality, the real awareness requires its created personal self and the generated isolated idea parts through the choices, decisions and agreements as established through it. And so potentially could the personal self be shown the simulation of everything, as after all we are this everything real awareness overview reality, but this would be somewhat overwhelming for the personal self. On real side experiences, I have experienced as though an overload of simulation, but generally this is so where the imagery isn't as important as what's taking place. But generally this is so where the imagery isn't as important as what's taking place. Situations where the simulation is very secondary, like where we are releasing certain agreements at a rapid pace, and we are bombarded with the associated simulated circumstances and lifetimes where the agreements were initially installed. The whole idea of a creation is that as we move through the life levels and to the physical, the simulation as effected from our consciousness agreements is slowed down, as opposed to us being presented as the everything effect of the entirety of our constructed consciousness in every moment, as this would be the equivalent of watching a million movies simultaneously. But as we isolate the ideas and watch but one movie at a time, having individualized lifetimes of body form and creational position, so this allows for greater ease of comparison, as the further from the everything reality we can have as our creational experience, the greater the comparison between the two positions. Hence why, as unconsciousness pervades and becomes more so, so this gives rise to the necessity of greater density of life levels, literally speaking, not only as a reflection of the unconsciousness and unawareness, but as then an automatic compensatory comparison, that regardless of how unconscious we become, regardless of the density of creational position we operate within, so our situation is the level of comparison we require, if indeed we utilize what we are experiencing in this manner, as at one time the astral level was the densest and lowest, literally speaking, but as unconsciousness became more so throughout consciousness, so was the required, reflected, physical level manifested in addition. And so, in this experience, my impressions were that this city in fact represented creation, visually limited for the personal self, that allows a greater comparison, but with the impression of its vastness, of its multi-dimensional nature. The buildings within the city then, of course, would represent ideas, and as this was creation representational in this context, so the single buildings, the homes, were the individual consciousnesses, and the larger buildings the collective consciousnesses. For as we share certain idea agreements with others, this rather binds us with them as a collective based on the idea, and can be thus represented as larger buildings that could accommodate the individuals of whatever the idea collective might be. And in reality then, each creational-based individual would be a part of many collectives, be they shared religious ideas, political, social, etc., and we can indeed enter various buildings on the real side that represent this, just as we can enter the recreated consciousness houses of others on the real side, which represents agreement with them that allows that we can. And so a city, that were it truly creational representing, it would boast every species, every individual's consciousness representing home, and every idea collective building, and we might imagine that body forms and consciousnesses alien to our own, that of a human, would have a certain representing a building with its appearance reflecting such differences. For an alien consciousness surely would present as a very alien-looking house, and of course this is reflected in the very design where it comes to physical level construction also. One can get a fair sense of the individual based on the kind of house they live in, as our environment must be our consciousness mirrored in a cause and effect creation. But here, in this experience, that my personal self not be overwhelmed, so it was as though more a slice of a creation where only the human race were represented, though what would take place could readily apply to all beings and body forms. For a brief glance at the scene overall, and one would assume all was rather stable, all humans going about their business, going about their decided intents and inclinations, and effecting whatever circumstances as a consequence, forging their various idea collective buildings, and adding to the size of their own consciousness representing personal self-homes. But this very much was the surface of the situation, and to delve a little deeper, to lean to the real awareness, and to that which underlaid the surface, so would be in actuality an overall consciousness so convoluted and compacted with idea agreement, so entrenched in unconsciousness and unawareness, that just as with a real side experience I shared recently about consciousness represented as a huge blob, this Duane would construe as very appropriate consciousness overall as one huge mass or glob, that as it effects into the physical and the surface level, it may appear relatively stable, business as usual, but underlying it is this massive distortion. My personal self then would be shown beyond the surface, a deeper dig into the reality of the distortion that consciousness overall is. And now it was very apparent that all the humans, and as I said, so this could apply to any body type and species, were in a constant state of emotion, fear and anxiety, creational agitation, as Duane puts it, and without the references as to what purpose this agitation actually serves, as all ideas are agitation and are as tools to recognize the is by, we have then such beings in a constant state of aggravation, glossing it over with whatever sensation indulgences chosen by each. But the simulated, presented reason for this fear in this experience were that all those present were constantly in danger from what appeared to be dinosaurs along the carnivorous lines. Quite apparent then were this representational of the more predatory proclivity that pervades consciousness, that has given rise to dominating species that exercise such want for control in the simulators, where such expressions become so. In the case of the simulator we currently are within, these would be more the reptilian body forms, as represented here, where the humans were in a constant state of potential danger from the dinosaurs that were ever present amongst all the consciousness representing buildings. The impressions were that for the humans, at any rate, they were generally oblivious of this ever-present threat. From the real awareness view, and that afforded my personal self a clear and present danger, but not so for those unaware and unconscious, to the extent that all they see are the surface worlds, not the lurking predators in their midst that can at any moment eliminate them, and certainly unaware of the almighty distorted glob that their consciousness, as a part of the overall consciousness, actually is. For the humans, like all beings, would be multi-dimensional. They were, in reality, real awareness, potentially aware of everything taking place. They have but to put aside a total immersion with their personal self, and if not, even then still would be a nagging sense, no matter how small, that everything isn't quite as it seems. For the humans would be periodically preyed upon by the dinosaurs that lurked in the cities, very apparent from my perspective view, but it's as though the humans just went about their surface business until the moment they literally would walk into the path of one of the dinosaurs and be almost bewildered as they were consumed. And now would the experience present as though from the perspective of my own process of awareness. What would be then a facing of everything in creation and the personal consciousness self, and a releasing of all agreements and attachments in addition, liberation from the shackles that ideas held to represent, the tap lines that bind us as their effects to a creation, which would include a growing awareness of all that is taking place in the simulator. As such, would I now be in the city also, but aware of the threat of the dinosaurs, and through my awareness, so I would afford myself greater survivability. This would be presented as though the ability to operate in the creational representing a city, but aware of the dinosaurs, the predators also, that every time they drew near, unlike the other unaware humans who practically walked into their gaping jaws, so when a dinosaur became perilously close, I would as though enter a particular kind of a building that afforded as though concealment, that I be undetected, not so much that we are hiding from others. A facing of a creation does entail everything creation is, including the body forms that through their consciousness construction are effecting creation's design, but more so that as we become more aware, we become more capable. We are releasing agreements where we are less vulnerable, particularly in relation to others, and the kind of established karmic contracts where others can at any moment bestow harm upon us, etc. And this was represented here with a greater ability to survive the perils of a creation, the dinosaurs that marauded the city. As buildings can represent ideas, here then was the idea of survivability as afforded through agreement releasing, entering these particular buildings where necessary. As I said, the idea is a facing of the consciousness, and not just our own, but consciousness overall. For to operate in any simulator, we take on and agree with the consciousness that is effecting its current state of being as we initially first enter it, like playing a computer game, where we must first download the game as it currently stands, its current stage of development, and that which will be shared by all others participating in the same game. This then is a shared overall consciousness that we take on and agree with. Consequently, whatever the state of the game currently is, we are a part of, as we add our own agreement as to its construct by virtue of participation, and that as we lock into the personal self, and somewhat neglect our real awareness, true position and standing, this is an agreement with the consciousness. This is agreement then with the overall consciousness we are a part of. And then in addition, we add our own creations and agreements to our consciousness, which as a part of the overall consciousness impacts then the affected simulator, additional compacting distortion as we add to the overall globe. And so, we are not only facing and releasing our own consciousness contribution, but the overall consciousness affecting a simulator game we also were in agreement with. A rather complex affair from the personal self perspective, but will involve then a confronting and releasing with agreement that extends to all beings within the simulator also, all those we had affiliation with throughout our many lifetimes. For we can't share experience with any being absent of agreement to the idea of them, and all experience then, all affiliations and relationships, regardless of their nature, remain as a consciousness idea files we are constantly in agreement with, until we begin such a process of a consciousness effacing and idea releasing. There will be certain beings that have made the choice to impact simulators on a vast scale, namely the life level gods, especially the Kalorm himself. To secure such a prominent creational position requires extreme agreement gleaning with practically every being in creation, an agreed to a created position and perpetuated through the various religions and so forth that are in actuality agreement with the Kalorm, and through his network and hierarchies of reptilian enforcers throughout multi-dimensional creation, so this serves as a maintenance and support structure for his position. The dinosaurs in the city would be the various tiers of reptilian enforcers, but now, in addition, as this experience progressed, as it was representing the creational process and the ultimate culmination and real purpose, that of his recognition, as such involved becoming aware of the creational happenings, of the predators, of a greater survivability, and also of the facing of the entirety of the consciousness, including all affiliations and attachment agreement with others, and additionally with those that have locked their karma with all through their choices to be very creationally prominent and controlling. So this inevitably involved a confrontation with such beings as the Kalorm god. For moving among the dinosaurs, the minions would be a colossal T-Rex. What better a creature for representing the Kalorm than that which was referred to as a king of the dinosaurs? He was a frightful sight to behold, as he also would terrorize and consume any human that crossed his path. But for me, so would the survivability building a sanctuary come into play, where he became perilously close to my position. I would encounter another being, although a solitary individual, but he as though represented overall all those on their processes of awareness, as he was operating as I was, a process of awareness that was leading to the Kalorm's door and beings of this type. For only at a certain point of the experience had the mighty T-Rex reared its colossal head, a hint that this was indeed imminent. Everything somewhat symbolic with this experience, whereas some can be far more apparent and self-explanatory. For now, this individual and myself would ascend as though to a position overseeing the creational representing city, but not removed from it. For literally speaking, we do a process through ourselves, what we have created. We actually as though fall backwards, undoing and releasing our creations from the physical astral to the etheric, assuming more so the ethereal, intuitive position of ourselves, and then a step into the real awareness position, and finally a recognition of the ears, should the intent be there to do so. For in this overview ethereal position in the experience, there would be presented as though a final test, if you will, and this presented as a negotiating through a series of stages with the monsters that stood as guardians at each. This I have experienced before and shared, whereas we effectively fall back through our creation, the resistance we face, that which we cling to idea-wise that presents as resistance, for me has been represented this way, that of progressing through levels and bypassing monsters. That just as the overall consciousness can be represented by a huge monster, so each individual idea or consciousness aspect can be similarly expressed, though on a smaller scale, monster size-wise. Interestingly, throughout my lifetime, from childhood, have I had this exact view, and what I would refer to back then as a recurring dream of these exact set of stages and the way they are designed, a kind of spiralling series of caverns that open up at certain points where the various monsters are contained, as though a hint of things to come, that this would be the lifetime where I would attempt this is recognition again, and the sense was I had attempted this before, as though the memory of this, as represented in this same way, an escalating series of rocky caverns, and the personal self-resistance in monster representing a form. For indeed, as the other individual and myself were standing in this position high above the city, would another being be going through this very process of ascending the caverns and the assorted monsters they contained. However, this other individual was as though floundering, struggling with his ascent, and my companion and myself knew he would be unsuccessful. Not that this would necessarily be failure, as he could try again, but it was as though this other individual and myself had the impression we could achieve this spiralling ascension, but had to as though wait for this other being. There was something more to this experience, a sense that the success or failure of this other individual's effort would be of a great consequence to the very simulator, and that this was involved in some way with such beings as the Kalom god. For as the Kalom does have a great sway and influence throughout all overall consciousness, what he decides will have a great impact. For should he choose, as an example, to step up and become more aware, the ripples of such intent would be simulator impacting on a massive beneficial scale for all. For it was as though we either couldn't assist this individual, as potentially he had the responsibility of holding the fate of the simulator in his hands, or he wouldn't accept our assistance, and this stubbornness would prove costly, not just to his own process and chances of creational extraction and positioning with the years, but to the very simulator, as though he had taken on much by way of a burden and responsibility where the entire consciousness was concerned, and ideally ought allow for assistance from those who, as impressions suggested, could complete the ascension of the cavern spiral, and together so could the entirety of the simulator situation be better handled with a more beneficial outcome. My impressions were this was broadly representational, and not a reflection on any particular individual, but as though a reminder that as aware as an individual may be, we all require assistance, and sometimes we can fall into perhaps the arrogance that we can take on something, or our awareness processes overall, absent of the help that others can afford. For we all are in life. We are just viewpoints of this everything reality. And does it make sense to not extend or to accept what is in reality assistance to or from ourselves? As though denying such is as though a mind-framed assumption of the idea of individuality as expressed on the simulated side, as opposed to the recognition of this one everything reality we all are. And here then, this notion of doing it one's self, that others are not required, was as though taken to its ultimate extreme of consequence, that the necessary successful dealings with the key individuals like the calorm, and actions and agreements set in motion that could have made a huge difference with the simulator, so the opposite would hold sway. The city, representing the simulator overall, would start to crumble and disintegrate in on itself, as though a representation of a simulator implosion that is the inevitable consequence of unawareness and unconsciousness having a prominence, and of the sheer burdening weight of the overladen with ideas consciousness mass finally expressing as the simulator effected from it, spiralling into its final demise. And what remained then would be the panic and fear prevalent amidst the city dwellers, and the calorm T-Rex dinosaur roaring in not only rage, but frustration, anguish, and despair. The experience could be construed many ways. There are alternate viewpoints, but in reality, all experiences, and including the explanations we apply, are simply the comparisons for our ears recognizing objective. And it never ceases to amaze me the various ways the real guides put together the experiences they show us, from the various angles that they do.
Okay, Kevin, that was excellent. Yes, great explanation. And as people study what we're presenting, eventually they will catch on to, get a better grasp of this. And it is all in the simplicity of it. And that's where the sun is the best representative. We don't look to the sun for anything. It's a reference, a representative to learning to see invisibly and to what is real. And so again, creation is our big adventure here. Yes, we need this for the personal self to actually help it withdraw from itself. Actually, it's so wrapped up in itself, and it can't help it because that's just how it is. It's placed in cause and effect. And so it seems very real, very vital. And it is, it's all that. And the challenge is to see more and be more. The option is always there. So all we can do is present it and continue on with the adventure. And what you've explained is the new now, what we're doing right now. And no one needs authorities or gurus and masters or all the old pretty words, etc. It's not going to do it. Doesn't matter how good you feel about things, that's in your personal life. It's learning to be real with what all life is. That's the best part, because that's all. Yes, thank you so much, Kevin. That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and being the great witness. Thank you.